Yo, welcome ladies and gentlemen to the fourth part of the ultimate Creepypasta Iceberg by the one and only Fried Pickle Boy. Let's jump right into it, shall we? Hey, wake up, pal. Something strange happened while you were asleep. I didn't catch a wink of sleep last night with it going on. Actually, I don't know how the hell you did either. The island, it's changed. It started snowing. It's frigid cold, as a matter of fact. It would seem the island itself may be a bit of a creepypasta or entity of some sort. Though given the instant change from sunny, hot beach island to snowy mountains, I believe its end goal may indeed be to make us permanent residents through one means or another. Strange people and shadows have been lurking about as well. We need to find the center of the island quickly before it changes again. God knows where it is now. The pit itself may change forms too. Scary thought. But we must persist, my companion. At the risk of sounding like an EXE author, my curiosity is getting the better of me. Zalgo. So before we go into the main entries of this tier, it's time we talk about one of the most famous and influential creepypastas slash pasta concepts that really should have been brought up on this iceberg by now. Zalgo, more of a horror-based meme than an actual story of any kind, is, as the Creepypasta Files wiki puts it, quote, Zalgo is the brainchild of Dave Kelly, aka Schmorky, a Flash animator and something awful goon. It was first mentioned but not seen in parodies of syndicated newspaper comics on a semi-secret page on his official site. Zalgo spread rapidly from there, with people making their edits of supposedly Zalgo-fied comics, writing creepypasta stories about him, and continuing the lore. According to Schmorky, Zalgo's abilities only affect comics, cartoons, and illustrations, and not reality itself, though this idea has drifted out of favor with the more recent stories portraying Zalgo as a more powerful demonic being, unquote. Now, while I could go into a lot of detail about this meme's creator Schmorky, as it's kind of a tale all of its own with how interesting they are, it might be going a little too off topic for this video right now. However, these edits, both photo, comic, cartoon, and video game related edits of Zalgo-fied characters, became one of the most prominent visual styles of the creepypasta scene. And it's kind of easy to see why. I mean, it's just giving a character black and red eyes, maybe some fake gore or tentacles, or just something creepy going on with their mouth, and there you go, Zalgo-fied. In most creepypastas that were written about the mysterious Zalgo, it usually played out something like a Lovecraft sort of inspired story stylistically, but honestly, it's these images that are really Zalgo's lasting effect.
Nice of the princess to invite us over for a picnic, eh, Luigi? I hope she meant lots of spaghetti!
Luigi, look!
particularly with how many pastas would be inspired by it, such as some My Little Pony pastas that are coming up very soon. Many Lost Episode creepypastas, even if Zalgo wasn't directly in the story itself, you would often see the images that accompany these stories as Zalgo-like in appearance. And then of course you have Sonic.exe, perhaps the most popular of them all, which again looks like a Zalgo edit, something which the original author tried very much to get away from with his shitty sequel and remake, but many of the .exe game makers noticed this connection as well, and there are many that have even tried to make Zalgo more important to the Sonic.exe story and even other EXE games, him being the reason all of these otherwise innocent or fun games are turning so dark and gruesome. They are basically being corrupted by him, and thus EXE games are essentially an evolution of the Zalgo edits. There's not much more to say about Zalgo other than that, but understanding its influence on creepypasta and its aesthetics and the like, I think is pretty cool. But now, on to our first official entry, the showers. Starting out, we have what is without a doubt one of the best creepypastas ever written, and another personal favorite of mine, maybe even in my top 5 favorites of all time. Written by Dylan Sindelaire, and later released altogether as a novella, The Showers is one of those creepypasta stories that marked a bunch of acclaim at the time, originally being 2 parts before Dylan would later expand upon the story and complete his horror masterpiece. The pasta opens with the following set of paragraphs, which set the mood for the long journey ahead. Quote, "Every area in all parts of the world has those area-specific urban legends that just refuse to die. Whether the stories are about a haunted asylum on the outskirts of the city, or a creature that lives in the nearby woods, or a ghost that haunts a lonely stretch of road outside of town, there is always a common thread within the tales. No one has ever been to these places, seen the creatures, or witnessed any hauntings with their own eyes. There are members of every generation who will proclaim that they know someone whose brother's best friend's sister went to that haunted house with 13 floors that used real blood and snakes and spiders, and it's so scary that no one has ever made it all the way through. Those same people will swear by these stories without ever being able to provide a shred of evidence or a name of someone who could provide proof of the claims, simply because everyone around here knows that it's a true story. The storytellers eventually pass the tales on to their children, who modify them just enough to keep up with the changing times, and so the cycle continues. I'm as skeptical as anyone when it comes to these stories, seeing as I was like a junkie when I was younger, constantly searching for more terrifying stories about whatever area of the country I was living in at the time. I made up and spread stories about haunted pizza parlors in New York, my cousin's encounter with the Jersey Devil, or how my grandfather encountered a feral, human-like demon creature in the woods of Colorado. I even broke the one rule of these stories by putting myself in them. This took guts, in hindsight, because I had to make sure that I always told them the same way. Surprisingly, no one ever called my bluff. I like to think that I've made some wonderful contributions to various urban legends around the Midwest and Northeastern states. I moved around a lot. There's always a surge of joy whenever I would wander the halls at school and hear one of my classmates retelling my stories to another one of their friends, adding little bits here and there like a massive game of telephone. I knew, of course, that the stories were complete fiction, but I stood my ground whenever someone asked me about them. I would even manage to act a little bit, speaking with a shaky voice, or looking scared when I would recount a situation that I supposedly experienced myself. I suppose this aspect of my childhood has led me to my current predicament, which I will recount in full, for the internet to take from what they will. I've laid this little introduction out as sort of a disclaimer, aimed particularly at those who will call my story into question. I've been like the boy who cried wolf for years, but I assure you, with every ounce of honesty and integrity that I have, that this time the wolf is real, unquote. The way this pasta opens up is plain and simply perfect, from not only building up the disturbing story to follow, but also tying the narrative metatextually through urban legends and the passing of this story onto us, the readers. From here, the tale sees our narrator talk about his social studies teacher from one of the many schools he went to throughout his life. Mr. Mays is his name, and how he was different from other teachers. He never talked down to the kids, the freshman class, and would often be in the know with modern pop culture references and the like. Then comes Halloween time, and Mr. Mays has turned off all the lights in his classroom. The place is now lit up by just a few stray candles and a lone jack-o'-lantern in the front of the room. He tells them that their assignment has been delayed to next Tuesday, and then proceeds to say, quote, "Today is probably my favorite day of the year, class," he said in a monotonous voice. "Halloween is my favorite holiday, and I want to share with you exactly why I love it so much," unquote. What follows is a detailed description of the time Mr. Mays and his friends set out on a road trip around the country after graduating from college, and they eventually need to make a stop in a little nowhere town in Nebraska, and one of his friends seems to think his grandfather's old farm is someplace close near here. So they set out towards it, and after some time, Mr. Mays warns all of his students that if they wish to leave the class now, they can, because what comes next is truly horrifying and graphic. Some of course do to get some free time off, but for everyone else, our narrator included, they're completely hooked in. What proceeds is an account of what they found in that old farmhouse. And while I don't want to spoil it for you, if you've never read the story, let's just say it's pretty disturbing, involves showers, and at the same time is extremely mysterious. So much so that no one quite knows how to fully process the story that Mr. Mays has just told them. Mr. Mays seems to be either an extremely good actor or is genuinely scared to talk about the last few events of this tale, something which brought a cold shiver to our narrator. Our narrator, having so much appreciation for this tale and the way Mr. Mays presented it, later asked him personally if there was more to this tale. What else happened? To which Mr. Mays simply winks and tells him that him and his friends were on some drugs, so who knows what exactly happened. The story, however, sticks with our narrator, and he would share it around for a long time after, embellishing details here and there depending on who he was telling the story to, and sometime later, while our narrator is nearing the end of his college days, he finds the time to reach out to Mr. Mays, as he realized that his story and the way he captured the attention of everyone in the room was what led him down the path that he finds himself in now, wanting to be a writer. He wants to thank Mr. Mays, but what he finds is an old man, drunk as he can be, at a bar. Very different from the image that he had in his head about him. The two catch up, both being adults now, and then the topic of the shower story comes up. The story that he told to him so many years ago. And then Mr. Mays reveals the truth about that story. That it was more than real. That the place that they went to was real. And what's more, his friend that he went with, died that night. Never made it out of that living hell. Our narrator is shocked to see the hurt in Mr. Mays' eyes. That this was more than some urban legend. It was all so much darker, gruesome, sadder than he had realized. Mr. Mays would die not long after that. In peace at last, it would seem. But now it's our narrator's turn to find out what really is in that old farmhouse. To go to the place that inspired him so long ago, along with his own friend. The place that haunted his teacher all those years. The showers. Now, all that I just went over was basically the first part of the story, and sort of flows into the second and eventual final part of the tale. The second part, of course, finds our narrator actually exploring the old farmhouse, and again, I won't be spoiling what happens there. And the final part of our story is kind of an aftermath of what happened after the first two parts, as well as a more definitive conclusion to this tale. Though, I will say that nowhere during any of the story is the mystery ever laid out flatly, instead existing as something to be interpreted and pondered upon after reading. And like Pen Pal, this story left a heavy feeling on me after reading it all for the first time, something which for me personally says something about the writing and storytelling at hand to get me so emotionally invested. It's one of the greatest creepypastas of all time, and while I would go into more of the creepy details, I genuinely want you to go read it, or listen to a reading of it if you've never experienced it. It's a perfect urban legend, a meta-urban legend, or creepypasta, if you will. The dawn is your enemy. This entry is one part real and one part pasta. The Dawn is Your Enemy was a sign-off bumper that was shown on Adult Swim between 2005 and 2010, which is the following. The point of this bumper was apparently to scare children from watching the block, especially those who stay up too late, hence why it would appear early on in the mornings, which is, you know, pretty fucked up, but also very in line with Adult Swim humor of the time. A lot of stuff on Adult Swim had that vibe that when you were a kid, the TV was really clearly telling you, you're not supposed to be watching this shit. Go to bed, you little dork. While at the same time, for someone who, like me, grew up with it, it just sort of has a vibe to it that after a while, late into the night, he just kind of gets cozy, you know what I mean? Does anyone else have good memories staying up late watching Adult Swim while you were playing video games or drawing some shit or just kind of laying there not falling asleep for hours on end? Well, anyway, that's the true story of The Dawn is Your Enemy. It was sort of a creepypasta in itself. It sounds like something that was fake, like a creepypasta, but it was just a TV bumper, though again, one meant to traumatize children on the same channel that children watched. So, you know, it's pretty fucking funny, I'm not even gonna lie. But what about the creepypasta version? Well, it kind of goes over what I just went over right now, and then proceeds to tell a story about how the ad went on for longer one night, and that was the last time it was ever shown on Adult Swim, and that when you get past the metal and the rumbling and the metal scraping against metal noises found in the original The Dawn is Your Enemy audio, what precedes is the sound of someone screaming in a terrifying plight for their life, before the metal starts scraping and tearing against what sounds like flesh and bone and gushing blood and the guttural death rattles of people dying underneath it. This was being broadcast to millions of children and adults across America, before it was then cut manually by the Adult Swim / Cartoon Network employees that were there. The question now being is, how did Cartoon Network cover this up, and where did they get the audio and what have you? So the creepypasta is just sort of an expansion upon the original idea. It's not really all that bad, but this is one of those cases where I think the truth is far more interesting and creepy than fiction. String theory. So from this tier onward, we're going to start getting into some more high concept with these stories. Starting with this one, which is about a protagonist waking up one morning to see a bunch of braided strings attached around his bedroom. When he heads to school, he notices objects, people, everything is covered and tied in the strings, some more than others. No one seems to notice them though, and for that matter, no one notices him either. That is until he unties all the strings off of his friend Lucy, who then finally notices him and all the strings as well. The pasta then goes on for a little bit with the two of them not being noticed by anyone anymore, and then they watch as the strings seemingly tell what's going to happen in the near future. They see how people are connected to other people in their actions, and it's at this point the true horror starts to set in, as our narrator begins to wonder if anyone has control over any aspect of their life, of any of their actions. Does anyone have free will, or is it all just determined already by the strings, thus rendering all actions meaningless, devoid of choice? They then come across a little imp-type creature that seems to be more scared of them than they are of it, and they notice that it has a bunch of string and little nails and tools for putting up the string. He asks if his kind are the ones responsible for the strings, to which he replies yes. Our narrator then asks if they or anyone has any free will, something which only seems to sadden the creature. All of this terrifies Lucy to no end, and the two of them are eventually left speechless to what they have discovered. However, once the two of them fall asleep and awoke the next morning, it seemed as though that our narrator was the only one who remembered this experience, but he no longer could see the strings anymore. The story ending with, quote, "Over breakfast, Lucy asked me why I looked so pale and nervous. I turned to her and smiled, mumbling something to her about feeling sick. But the truth was, I was scared, because I couldn't see any strings, and I was wondering whether my actions were truly my own." Unquote. So yeah, this one's not full of scary serial killers or experiments gone wrong, but instead this one is the fear over how much control we really have over our own actions, if free will truly exists, as well as what I'd like to call our first theoretical information hazard pasta, or a story about someone discovering a dark truth about the government or general surroundings or the universe itself, and being burdened with that knowledge. I quite like this pasta. It's short and to the point, and gets its disturbing ideas across pretty well. Gateway of the Mind. Well, wouldn't you know it, it's one of the other creepypastas that I read in full on my old YouTube channel once. I wonder if it still holds up. Well, it is a super short one, so why don't we give it a quick read. Quote, "In 1983, a team of deeply pious scientists conducted a radical experiment in an undisclosed facility. The scientists had theorized that a human without access to any senses or ways to perceive stimuli would be able to perceive the presence of God. They believed that the five senses clouded our awareness of eternity, and that without them, a human could actually establish contact with God by thought. An elderly man who claimed to have nothing left to live for was the only test subject to volunteer. To purge him of all his senses, the scientists performed a complex operation in which every sensory nerve connection to the brain was surgically severed. Although the test subject retained full muscular function, he could not see, hear, taste, smell, or feel. With no possible way to communicate with or even sense the outside world, he was alone with his thoughts. Scientists monitored him as he spoke aloud about his state of mind in jumbled, slurred sentences that he couldn't even hear. After 4 days, the man claimed to be hearing hushed, unintelligible voices in his head. Assuming that it was an onset of psychosis, the scientists paid little attention to the man's concerns. 2 days later, the man cried that he could hear his dead wife speaking to him, and even more, he could communicate back. The scientists were intrigued, but were not convinced until the subject started naming dead relatives of the scientists. He repeated personal information to the scientists that only their dead spouses and parents would have known. At this point, a sizable portion of the scientists left the study. After a week of conversing with the deceased through his thoughts, the subject became distressed, saying the voices were overwhelming. In every waking moment, his consciousness was bombarded by hundreds of voices that refused to leave him alone. He frequently threw himself against the wall, trying to elicit any pain response. He begged the scientists for sedatives so he could escape the voices by sleeping. This tactic worked for 3 days until he started having severe night terrors. The subject repeatedly said that he could see and hear the deceased in his dreams. Only a day later, the subject began to scream and claw at his non-functional eyes, hoping to sense something in the physical world. The hysterical subject now said the voices of the dead were deafening and hostile, speaking of hell and the end of the world. At one point he yelled, "No heaven, no forgiveness," for 5 hours straight. He continually begged to be killed, but the scientists were convinced that he was close to establishing contact with God. After another day, the subject could no longer form coherent sentences. Seemingly mad, he started to bite off chunks of flesh from his arm. The scientists rushed into the test chamber and restrained him to a table so that he could not kill himself. After a few hours of being tied down, the subject halted his struggling and screaming. He stared blankly at the ceiling, his teardrops silently streaked across his face. For 2 weeks, the subject had to be manually rehydrated due to the constant crying. Eventually, he turned his head and, despite his blindness, made focused eye contact with a scientist for the first time in the study. He whispered, "I have spoken with God, and He has abandoned us," and his vital signs stopped. There was no apparent cause of death, unquote. That's Gateway to the Mind, and it kind of reminds me of the Russian sleep experiment and other experiment-based creepypastas, and it follows a lot of the same sort of stuff those stories tend to do, even ending with a chilling, if not rather cliche, quote from the test subject. Although it is one of the older ones to be fair, so I'll cut it some slack there. I really like that in this one, the guy doesn't turn into a monster or get possessed by anything, but simply goes crazy and dies, which is kind of anticlimactic, yes, but also kind of is the only thing that would happen given the experiment, I suppose. This one is often cited as one of the best creepypastas ever written, and while I do think it is actually very, very good, I'm not sure if I'd put it in my own personal top 10 or 20, but then I have also read and listened to more creepypastas than the average fellow, so yeah, it is a good one though. One of the best ones to start with in the early days of creepypasta. This creepypasta was often paired with this black and white footage, which was supposed to be the supposed test subject. But if you're a longtime viewer of mine, you might recognize that this footage as being from Oliver de Sagassan, who created the video for performance art on his website. And here it's just, filtered through black and white. Mereana, Mordegard, Glesgorv. I already covered this one in detail on my YouTube iceberg, and it's honestly one of the most stupid creepypastas out there. It's about a video, which is this JPEG of this guy tinted red, and it's apparently cursed, and you'll exit the game if you watch the whole thing. There's like a part of the story where a bunch of people watched it, and then they cut their eyes out, and then they mailed their eyes to YouTube.com. Fucking headquarters. Yeah, that's it. That's the gist. Next, Plankton Got Served. Here we have a lost episode creepypasta, but with a bit of a twist. Not by much, but a little. See, this creepypasta opens with the author noting how you, yes, you the reader or listener, has probably heard of lost episode creepypastas, especially that one about Squidward doing something pretty bad, if you know what I mean. But those are all false, unlike this one. Now, this one is the real deal. The pasta goes on to explain, quote, "I remember a SpongeBob episode that was altered heavily, but still remains in circulation today. This is One Course Meal from season 7. In the episode, Mr. Krabs finds out that Plankton is horrified of whales and uses it to his advantage. This is one of the least popular episodes of the show due to the dark nature of the episode, even after the episode was heavily altered," unquote. This is an actual episode, by the way, and is indeed often considered one of the worst episodes of the series, mainly because the episode is about Mr. Krabs tormenting Plankton by pretending to be a whale, until Plankton attempts to commit exit game by having a car run him over. Yeah, that is pretty mean-spirited and dark for sure. Anyway, our author goes on to note how he watched the original version of this episode, which apparently was quite different from the final episode, and it used to be titled Plankton Got Served. He also notes that he managed to see this episode unaltered because it was aired unaltered on Nick's website at the time before it hit TV. He then describes the episode up to the point when Plankton decides to commit exit game, just like in the original episode. But instead of it not happening, Plankton actually gets hit by a bus, and the following is what happened next. Quote, "Plankton finds himself standing on a single platform, overlooking darkness. In the darkness, he sees whales all looking up at him. There are members of his family he can faintly make out, calling out for him to jump down. Plankton looks above and sees a light he can scarcely believe. This would seem to represent heaven and hell. Plankton, resigned to his fate, jumps and plunges into the darkness. This is when the episode ends, and the traditional credits for the show are shown, parallel to Plankton's descent into the darkness," unquote. Our author then spends the last part of the story swearing up and down that he for sure saw this, and that he doesn't expect people to believe him, but he is nonetheless telling the truth, etc, etc. Now, I will hand it to this creepypasta. It does feel much more reserved than most of them. I suppose in some ways this is because it's based on an actual episode that already had an out-of-character joke/scenario, and so adding to it to make it just a little bit more creepy works a lot better than, you know, other stuff we've covered. That said, the whole "trust me guys, I really saw it, I know you read lots of creepypastas, but this isn't one, I'm being serious guys, this is the truth, like it or not, it's the truth," it's kind of heavy-handed, yeah? It calls far too much attention to itself. In fact, I almost never like it when creepypastas tell the reader that they know that they read lots of creepypastas. I get what they're going for, but for how many times we're gonna start seeing that here soon, it becomes a cliche in of itself, and a rather desperate one at that. Symmetry/noises. So these two stories are put together because they are written by the same Reddit user, that being @alwaysthrough. They are also connected because they seem to be stories based around the same neurotic, crazy fellow. The first story, Symmetry, is all about a guy who ever since he was a kid has needed everything to be symmetrical, from his hair, to his clothes, to his surroundings, to the way he walks, sleeps, eats, etc. There's just one little problem. Ever since he was a kid, one of his eyes are blue and the other green. I suppose you might be guessing where this is going, given that it's a creepypasta. You see, the lad scoops his green eye out with a spoon and then cuts off the optical nerves. Thus, his imperfection is gone. But then, he realizes that he was kind of fucking stupid. Now he has one hole inside of his face, but not a hole on the other side. And so, of course, he fixes that. That really is the whole story. But I will say that it's one of the most cringe-inducing stories I've read on the list. Not cringy as in bad, mind you. Cringy as in the descriptions of the man cutting out his eye and the issues that happens with it with the second one. It makes my skin crawl thinking about it, and certainly reading it. So, for pure shock value, it's a pretty good short story. There's not much else to it besides the pure shock value, but I suppose it does what it's trying to do pretty well. Noises, on the other hand, is about a blind man, presumably the same blind man, who gets a desk job, being able to make emails and such with his voice. But now, suddenly, he can't seem to stand the small noises people make. They're coughing, sneezing, sniffing, mouth-smacking noises. This, like this man's issue with Symmetry, comes to completely control his life and his thoughts. He gets angry, snaps at people around him, breaks out in hives and rashes, or at least he thinks he is anyway. The noises anger and pester him so much that he actually does believe there's a rash on the back of his neck that's constantly pestering him, which eventually the rash goes into his ears. This eventually leads to the poor fellow stabbing his ears out with a pair of pliers. The description, once again, being unbelievably disturbing and descriptive. The story ends with this man, now blind and without any of his hearing, but finally happy, free from the pestering noises that ailed him so. Those are the two stories, and while I will say the first one is a lot more fucked up, mainly because stuff having to do with the eye is just yikes, but all the same, the stories of people's obsessive behavior going to a comical yet frightening extremes is interesting. But again, there isn't much to the stories, mind you, it's just a lot of build up to a really fucked up scene. But at least it doesn't overstay its welcome. Unlike Cupcakes. So now it's finally time for a couple of My Little Pony creepypastas. Something which back in 2011 or so, when this first pasta was made, was a rapidly growing fan base that if you frequented near any website that had any kind of art submission of the time, you would see the fans of this series singing its praise, creating fan art, etc. Like it or not, it was everywhere at the time, and it was only going to get everywhere even more as the next couple of years came to pass. This first story is kind of simple in premise. It follows Pony Rainbow Dash, this fast-flying one of the group, who goes to Pinkie Pie's house, this pink one of the group, and is there to help her make some cupcakes. But the twist here is that Pinkie feeds Dash a drugged cupcake so she can tie her down and torture her for the rest of the story, including cutting off her cutie mark, cutting off her wings, eating her freshly cut meat in front of her, etc. All for the sake of slowly killing and mutilating her, and eventually using her flesh for some more sweet cupcakes to feed to some more ponies. This creepypasta is almost exclusively a long, drawn-out torture scene. And I guess it's pretty fucked up, you know? It's meant to shock the reader with it being innocent characters being slowly tortured, and one of them is like a psychopath and what have you. But I'll be honest, maybe it's because I'm not a pony, and I'm, you know, not really familiar or much of a fan of My Little Pony in general, but beyond the basic horror, this one does little for me, and kind of got super boring about halfway through. I've never been one for those long extended torture scenes anyway. It just all seems kind of edgy for the sake of it if you have it draw out for so long. Especially if there's no build up and there's not really anything that comes after. It's just sort of just a torture scene, I guess. Now I understand the appeal of these sorts of creepypastas is seeing a character that you either really enjoy or connect with or growing up with or had grown up with or whatever being slowly destroyed. It's one of those hashtag ruin my childhood sort of stories. And hey, that's cool. I'm glad it had such an effect on you if you happen to feel that way. But for me, it's just some edgy fan fiction. Even if it were based on a series I really love and enjoy, it just doesn't really do anything for me. But, oh well. Luna Game. Now this one is a bit more interesting, mainly because I'm not really sure if there was ever really a connected creepypasta story with this. This is more a series of creepypasta games, and more so the story of the real-life mystery and legacy that they left behind. It all started with an anonymous user on the most popular My Little Pony website of the time, Equestria Daily, uploaded a video game file simply titled Luna Game, which, bear in mind, fan games weren't really much of a thing for this series as of yet, due to bronies and the like still kind of being a developing fan base. So of course, a ton of people downloaded the game, and was greeted with the following. A simple little game where you play as the My Little Pony character Luna, platforming through a rudimentary little area before suddenly a jump scare fills the screen with either this Zalgo infected Pinkie Pie or this ominous looking Applejack pony while distorted audio is playing. Eventually the game would then close, and on your desktop you would find tons of pictures of the same creepy image you saw in the game, along with a bunch of text files saying the end is nay, which, you know, they're ponies. It's kind of funny, I guess. See, at first, because of the way the game plays so many files on your computer, many thought that the game was a virus of some kind, and it was quickly removed for that reason. And then site founder Sephisto announced that he would not be accepting any more submissions from yo-yo games or any other type of games that require you to download them to play, and that games of this sort were banned from the site. And he went on to apologize to anyone who was exposed to the Luna, which is kind of dramatic, but all the same, this caught many people's attention at the time. Since there wasn't really anything like it at the time, a creepypasta game, and after many did some virus checks on the game files itself, they found that there was nothing actually malicious in there. It was just sort of a creepy joke. Later on, the author of the game would end up making 4 sequels to that original game, though this time uploaded them to a separate website as well as a dedicated one. The brony community now eagerly awaited each new entry in this series, and they really became something so much bigger than what it originally was. Though, again, the games themselves are mostly just Luna walking for a while through some rudimentary platforming, and then there's a jump scare, and that's it, the end. Not much else. In fact, you might call it a bit of a proto-Sonic.exe sort of story, since it did come before that, and will be some good foundation for what Sonic.exe would ultimately do later on. That's basically it. YouTuber IzzyZ made a pretty good video if you want more details about the other game entries in the series if you're super curious, as well as one of the only interviews online with the mysterious author of the game, a decade after they had all come out, which is pretty interesting. God's Mouth. God's Mouth is a short story about a guy and his girlfriend Margaret, who go exploring into a cave named God's Mouth, which is illegal to climb into. Despite this, our narrator really wants to explore it because he's a spelunker, I suppose, while his girlfriend seems anything but happy to be here. They eventually get into a fight over this and then lose their way into the cave afterward. They try to make their way out, but it seems the cave is changing, even slowly closing in on them, the cold walls slowly turning warm to the touch. By story's end, Margaret gets separated from our narrator and dies by the jagged closing in of rocks, and then the same cruel fate happens to our narrator. And that's pretty much it. It's a short story that taps into the natural fear that comes in being in such a dangerous place like this, in a similar way to Ted the Caver, though obviously much more short and far more simple. Overall, overall a pretty decent pasta. And then a skeleton popped out, / who was phone, / and the day of all the blood. So I put all these stories together on this tier because they all sort of represent the same thing. They're a meme or a pure troll pasta of epic magnitude. And they go as follows. Quote, "Warning. If you have a heart condition, do not read this. You will drop to the floor, flopping like a fish, while clenching your heart, seeing as you are having a heart attack. Also, if you have a sensitive anus, do not read this. The brick you shat will be painful. A few years ago, a man was walking down a road because his car broke down, and he saw a car coming up behind him, so he stuck out his thumb to hitchhike, and the car stopped ahead of him. He ran up to the passenger side and opened the door. When he opened the door, a skeleton popped out," unquote. Now, what's sort of funny about this one is while the original story is somewhat remembered, what's really remembered is that catchphrase-like ending, and then a skeleton popped out, which then would often be times put at the end of long, more serious type creepypastas that would grab the reader's attention from the beginning, only to completely deflate it with this troll ending. Next is the day of all the blood. Quote, "This is the story of a day where there was all this blood. A man was walking around and blood started coming out of him everywhere. There was so much blood that it filled up an elevator. He went to the store and there was just blood all over the place. People were slipping in it and they were all grossed out. He tried to go swimming and all the sharks went nuts and bitten everybody. He got chased by all the vampires everywhere. One time, the blood got a kid and a dog. At the end of the day, everybody decided they would send him to space so that he would stop getting blood everywhere. The scariest part is that that man was you, or he was a lady if you are a lady, and you forgot that this happened," unquote. I think this one is pretty self-explanatory. I don't really explain it. And then finally, the most iconic of them all.
"So you're with your honey, and you're making out. When the phone rings, you answer it. And the voice is, 'What are you doing with my daughter?' You tell your girl and she say, 'My dad is dead.' Then who was phone? Who was phone?"
This one was a favorite amongst the early days of creepypastas on 4chan, and even created its own genre of troll pasta, that being these ultra-brief, badly written on purpose stories with a twist at the end. And in a way, is sort of deconstructing what made a creepypasta or an urban legend to begin with in a funny way. Crybaby Lane. So this one is also based on something real, but not at all close to the actual thing. The real Crybaby Lane was a Nickelodeon film that was basically just a ghost story type movie, where a couple of brothers hear a scary story about conjoined twins. One was good and the other was bad, and when they both passed away, one was buried normally while the evil one was buried in a shallow grave down at Crybaby Lane. Well, through a seance, these ghost twins end up waking up, and as you might imagine, the evil one is trying to possess people and what have you. Paranormal stuff ensues, and eventually all is put back to normal by film's end. That's the basic premise of the movie. However, it only ever aired once back in 2000, and for some time was assumed to be a lost film, and that perhaps it was too intense for kids and was banned or something. This didn't end up being the case, however. When it was looked into and people were asked, turns out Nick just sort of forgot all about it, and that's really it. It was aired shortly after though on Teen Nick and a few more times after due to how much publicity it had gotten through the lost media community and what have you. The name Crybaby Lane does sound rather ominous as well, which is probably what inspired the author of this creepypasta. So then, now that you know what the actual Crybaby Lane movie is and that it's a real movie, wasn't banned, it was just forgotten, and it's just kind of mediocre at best, what about this creepypasta? Well, it's about a dude named Johnny who, after college, gets an internship at Nickelodeon Studios. He's quickly put to the job of an upcoming TV film, Crybaby Lane, and it's here where he meets a man who is eventually put in charge of the project, Peter Lauer. Lauer is described as a sick fuck who frankly sounds like a cartoonishly evil man who wants to see his disgusting fetishes play out on the screen through a live-action Nickelodeon movie. Yep, that sounds about right. In all seriousness though, this creepypasta is pretty dumb, and mainly because Lauer is just 100% a crazy evil cult sadistic villain from the start, and no one even bats an eye at it at all. Like, here's a few examples. Quote, "At first, cannibalism and other fucked up shit was kept as jokes and tasteless comments, but as time went on, it became more and more overt. I'd give him an idea, which most of the time he would end up using. Like, how about a movie starts with a morbid undertaker who reads them stories, to which he'd reply, yeah, and then he can cut them up into little pieces and force feed them to his dog." He made these jokes a few times in the early stages, but then he got serious. He'd stand up like he was Jesus or something, clear his throat loudly, and proclaim his idea. I'd be the only one to shoot it down every fucking time. One day, near the end of our brainstorming sessions, Lauer cleared his voice and stood up. We all fell silent and looked at him like we normally did. He stood up and said, "Gentlemen and females, I have an idea." I remember what he did. He paused and looked right at me as he said, "This story will revolve around the legend of a pair of Siamese twins. Have you ever heard of the Donner Party?" Everyone nodded except for me. I didn't like where this conversation was going. "They ate themselves when they got cold. They ate each other." Everyone nodded. I closed my eyes. "What would Siamese twins do if they had nothing to eat? Would one wait until the other twin dies, then consume her own sister's flesh? Would they claw out each other's eyes until one of them died, then dine upon them like a vulture tearing at the skin of a dead deer? I do not know. It is interesting indeed." I didn't know what the fuck I was hearing. I opened my eyes and looked around the room. No one was fucking moving. Everyone's eyes were on Lauer except for mine, and when I looked at him, he was still staring at me. "Children like violence. They revel in it. Children like to be scared. So we'll scare them, won't we, Johnny?" He leaned over the table, getting pretty damn close to my face. His breath smelt like decaying shit. I stared back at him. "I think you're fucked up, to be honest." He smiled, then backed away. "Oh, I'm fucked up alright, but you have to be fucked up to survive in this cutthroat world." His grin expanded. "Literally, right now I'm going to show you some pictures that will spark some of your imaginations." Unquote. See what I mean? Now, I will admit, Lauer is so fucking over the top that the story is kind of fun to read, just because you're just waiting for what the fuck this guy's gonna say next. But then, the creepypasta implies that Nick used this man's sick ideas and just didn't end up using the sick part by the story's end. Quote, "Early on, Lauer posed an idea of the two brothers capturing a squirrel, putting said squirrel in a jar and slowly drowning it before filling the jar with sand and dropping it into the bottom of a pond. Soon after this was suggested, Sandy from SpongeBob SquarePants appeared in the tea at the Tree Dome. Lauer also suggested in one scene of the movie for a man with a squid-like nose to take off his pants in front of the two boys and them off screen, but heavily implied. Squidward soon appeared as a major character in SpongeBob SquarePants. It was suggested that the two be stepbrothers, forced to live in the same house after the first one's mom was found dead in a shallow grave, her body heavily cannibalized by her own husband, a local weatherman. A show with a vaguely premise. Drake and Josh started in 2004, and the stepfather is indeed a weatherman. Lauer also suggested the younger brother have a doghouse in which he keeps various animal fetuses encased in acid that he regularly uses to poison his mother to have sex with his abusive stepfather. As told by Ginger, debuted soon after. A man who captures the souls of children in a vacuum cleaner and then sends them to Hades? Danny Phantom. A robot who goes insane on two brothers, kills one of them and wears his skin, pretending to be the dead brother at high school? My Life as Teenage Robot. The list goes on, and Nickelodeon knows they are continuing the legacy of Lauer, sometimes subtly, sometimes overtly, and there's nothing that you or I can do about it. Unquote. Okay, so, number 1. Squidward was always a major character in the SpongeBob show. 2. I love the tone of this last part. It's like, yeah, I just spent some serious black pills, mister. What you gonna do now, you fuck? When he literally said nothing that made any sense. So yeah, not very good. Though I will say that had this pasta been more subtle or implied that while this guy was coming up with the ideas for characters and scenarios and kids cartoons, they actually represented something far more disturbing that only really he and maybe other fucked up people like him could see in it. Maybe the use of code words or strange symbolic situations. Yeah, I could see this one being a bit better to play to its strengths, but it just isn't. It's a fun read because, again, Lauer is a pretty fucked up villain, but it's just too stupid to really take seriously whatsoever. But while we're on the topic of lost Nickelodeon stuff, Max and Ruby 0004. For this bonus entry, I want to include one of the more well-known lost episode type pastas that certainly made the rounds back in the day. Max and Ruby 0004 follows our well-meaning protagonist who is looking for a Max and Ruby DVD for his little cousin as a present for Christmas. According to the author, almost all the Max and Ruby DVDs were sold out or were in dubious quality on eBay, which I don't know how that was the case, but okay. Well, after several days of searching for a fucking Max and Ruby DVD, something randomly was shoved through his letterbox. It was this, a Max and Ruby DVD with a crudely drawn cover. Now, that is pretty creepy, that you were, looking for something online and then you randomly get it in the mail. Like, not even the official thing in the mail, someone's homemade version of it in the mail. It seems like something you might want to look into and, kind of freak out about a little bit, since that's pretty crazy. Probably implies someone is spying on you. Quote, "It was a Max and Ruby DVD, but I had never seen one like it online. It was like some little kid had drawn on the front cover with a marker. The title was just Max and Ruby, with what looked like a poorly drawn illustration of Max and Ruby on the front. There were no names or anything, but on the back it had a list of 4 episodes, all with blunt titles. Episode 1, Episode 2, Episode 3, Episode 4. I quickly gave the DVD a watch over. To my surprise, all the episodes were in perfect quality and seemed to have no flaws. It was as if it was a real DVD, just with a homemade cover. The only thing I thought appeared odd was the episode selection screen. The episodes had names, but they were all titled Max and Ruby 1, with the numbers being changed as it went down the list. The actual selection screen was just a plain white screen with black and white text and nothing else." Unquote. So then we're just gonna ignore that you inexplicably received this then? Not even a cursory thought as to how it got there. Not even a kind of idiotic mention of, wow, that sure was lucky. No? Okay. Yeah, that's cool. Quote, "After giving it much thought, I decided to change the cover to something a little nicer by printing out a DVD cover that I had found on Google and tracked down, and the names of the episodes so they were labeled correctly. So I left the episode list screen alone because I figured it was self-explanatory. Christmas went by and things were fine. I gave my little cousin her DVD and she was happy with it all through Christmas, but that was only because she hadn't watched it yet. On Boxing Day, the family had gone out for lunch and left me to babysit my cousin. I was not too bothered about being left at home. I figured now was a good time to put on the DVD for her. I had put the DVD in and allowed it to play, while I was in the kitchen eating my dinner. From what I could hear, she had watched episodes 1 through 3 so far. I was just about to finish off my noodles when I heard my cousin screaming from the other room. Dropping everything, I ran into the living room and saw my cousin curled up on the floor, screaming. I had looked up at the TV and I felt my heart in my throat. What I caught a glimpse of was one of the most horrifying things I had ever seen. It was what appeared to be a frame of Max and Ruby standing next to each other in complete darkness. But what made it so horrible was their lack of faces. They had lost their noses and mouths, and their eyes were replaced with big black holes. The colors were a disgusting blood red, and there was faint static in the background, unquote. So it turns out that the creepily timed package with the creepily specific contents with the creepy cover art that also had disturbing implications that someone was watching you or your internet browsing history at the very least and was close enough to deliver this package to you had some creepy stuff in the actual episodes as well. Who could have thought? Who could have figured that one out? Some other details are given about the scream, but skipping ahead, our narrator of course turns things off and later decides to watch the DVD in full by himself to see what exactly led up to all of that. It all starts off normal, and the first 3 episodes are standard fare stuff, but the last episode was now retitled Rest in Peace, Mommy and Daddy. The episode then, through background noises and other effects, shows Max and Ruby's parents have died, and then, quote, the scene then switched to both Max and Ruby standing in front of what looked like a gravestone labeled R.I.P. Mommy and Daddy. The two of them had no faces. At this point, there was also no sound apart from faint static. This screen remained on screen for about a minute and a half before it cut away to black. It then changed scene again, now showing Max and Ruby sitting in Ruby's room. Both of them were sobbing. The sobs were so realistic and heart-wrenching that it sounded like it was recorded from a real person mourning. What happened next was probably the most disgusting yet saddest thing I had ever witnessed. The scene had changed to Max sitting in his room. He was standing on a chair with a noose hanging from the ceiling. He placed the noose around his neck. My computer screen faded black as the static got louder. Almost instantly it cut to Ruby walking in on her brother. She let out a horrific scream as the background turned black. The camera was panned on her face as the sound of a chair being kicked and the same choking from before began to play. The picture of Ruby's face stayed on screen for a good 5 minutes. This time her eyes had returned as the same gaping holes. Ruby then started crying, and as before there was no other facial features. The static slowly grew louder and drowned out the sound of her cries. The scene cut to black with a loud static. When the screen returned, Ruby was now standing on her own in the garden by 2 gravestones. One labeled Rest in Peace, Mommy and Daddy, and the other Rest in Peace, Brother. At this point, I had already been sick and was sitting all shaken. The episode seemed to have come to an end at last, as an old computer noise started playing. I was about to eject the DVD when the same image came up like it did on the TV before. This time, however, there was text above the 2 rabbits which read, "Death is our only release." There were no credits or anything else. It stayed on this for a few seconds before the DVD finally popped out of my laptop, unquote. Pretty intense stuff, especially the DVD popping out of the laptop by itself. Our author ended up destroying the DVD after all that, but made sure to note that he took a few screenshots beforehand so you could all see these images. But he didn't have the forethought to just upload the whole episode online and further prove his story. The story ends with the following. Quote, "It was a late night and my parents had gone out for dinner, leaving me to watch TV. I heard what sounded like someone posting something through the door. At this point, the DVD had left my mind since I hadn't told anyone about it. However, it all came flooding back when I looked down at the letter in front of me. It was just messily folded up and said, 'Death is our only release,'" unquote. And that's Max and Ruby 0004. It's not an exceptionally good creepypasta. In fact, it's pretty shitty. Though I do like the inclusion of so many pictures to add some visuals to the story. I also like that the story implies there is something far more sinister behind this lost episode. That being whoever the fuck the guy who was that gave him this DVD and parting message actually was. The only problem is the story never explores that far more creepy part. It's seems more like a means to get this episode in our guy's hands rather than what it really should be, a far more creepy focus, at least in my eyes. But again, I wanted to include this story because it was pretty popular back in the day. Hell, a lot of Lost Episode creepypastas were, good, bad, or otherwise, but mostly bad. Speaking of King of the Hill Lost Episode. So I picked this bonus entry mainly because I really like King of the Hill, and it was one of those creepypastas that I remember listening to early on in my creepypasta enjoying youth. But it's also one of those pastas that has a kind of interesting story associated with it that I'll get to in a moment. But first, the pasta at hand. Our pasta starts off with our narrator heading down to Goodwill, originally to get some N64 games, but then ended up going to the VHS section in the back. There he saw a set of Titanic VHS tapes, which he was going to get for him and his wife to watch. However, whenever he pulled the dust cover off, he found instead, written with Sharpie, King of the Hill, Season 1, Episode 1, Not Rated, as well as King of the Hill, Season 1, Episode 1, Not Rated 2. Piquing his curiosity, he decides to buy the set and take it home. Quote, I soon turned the TV to Channel 3 and began viewing Koth, S1, E1, and R. It had the regular opening of the first episode of King of the Hill, but without the music. It was just a silent camera panning over the city of Arlen. It began normally after that, with Bobby at the baseball game and Hank yelling at him. As we all know, Bobby did not succeed. This is where everything started to get weird. On the ride home, Hank, Peggy, and Bobby were completely silent, and this went on for about 3 minutes. No one was angry, no one had any expression actually, just completely blank faces, with only silence for company. Abruptly, as the family pulls into the driveway, it cuts to a scene inside a house. Hank was yelling at Bobby for not giving 110%. Hank then picked up a baseball and got into a throwing position. At this point, the video quality was getting very scraggly, and the volume level was raised roughly 10%. Hank pegged the ball and it hit Bobby's nose. Peggy was seen in the background crying, and Hank simply told her to
shut the hell up.
Bobby immediately cupped his nose and ran out of the room, crying the whole way, unquote. Hank Hill has had enough, clearly. I like the weird pun that the volume of the TV raised by 10%, as in if it was at 100%, it would now be at 110%. Hank's power is truly beyond the dimensions of the VHS tape. Quote, as Bobby was in the bathroom checking his nose, a social worker came to the door. Peggy greeted him as Hank sat on the sofa, relaxing as if nothing happened. From this point, the colors began to look more like a real episode. The scene with Hank telling the social worker off played as it did in the real episode. Suddenly, the scene from the officially aired episode cut to another scene, which was not from the real episode. It was a scene with more ragged video, yet the audio remained the same. This scene depicted Peggy sitting on the phone late at night, most likely contacting child services to tell them about how Hank purposely threw the baseball at Bobby. Hank suddenly walked through the doorway. He was in the bathrobe and had no glasses. He grabbed the phone. "Who the hell is this?" Hank yelled. "This is the Department of Child Services," was the response. Hank's face quickly turned red and slammed the phone back on the wall. He grasped Peggy by the neck. "You gonna get more of those twig boys over here to put me in prison and take my boy away?" he howled. The scene cut to Hank taking Peggy by the back of the neck down the hallway to the backyard. Hank took a propane tank off the grill and shoved the valve into Peggy's mouth. The video went silent for a minute, simply showing the propane valve in Peggy's mouth. When the scene started moving again, Peggy's eyes slowly closed, and a voice was heard. "Buck Strickland, forgive me for using propane like this," unquote. Okay. I hope you're starting to see why I picked this pasta now, because this shit is fucking hilarious. Legitimately, if this isn't a troll pasta, then it is accidentally comedy gold. Quote, the only problem was that when Hank said this, Hank did not sound like Mike Judge, the creator of the show who voiced Hank. It sounded like an older and deeper voice. The screen went black after this. I fast forwarded through the rest of the tape to make sure there was no more content on it. There was none. I just thought to myself, why so much wasted space? And at this point I was really shaken up. I went to grab a coffee, and when I got back, I popped in the second tape. It was just a black screen. I fast forwarded to check for content and eventually came across stuff that was really starting to scare me. It was a funeral. There were very few colors. There was only various forms of gray and black and the colors of people's faces. It just did not seem like a real King of the Hill episode. The funeral was for Peggy. Attending it was all of the Hill's neighbors, including some acquaintances such as Hank's father, Cotton, and John Racorn. Even Hank was there, claiming that Peggy had committed exit the game. As Peggy's coffin was lowered into the hole, it faded into an overhead view of it being lowered. This part really scared the shit out of me. It was a somewhat highly realistic image of Peggy in a coffin. The reason I say somewhat is because it looked real, but it all still appeared to be drawn and not a real person. It was just a realistic cartoon. Would you say it was even hyper-realistic? The scene then cut to Bobby, Hank, and Ladybird sitting on a porch. Bobby had a queasy face and Hank had one hand on the propane tank that he used to commit the murder. Bobby turned to his father. "Why did you do it, Dad?" he asked in a humble voice. "I don't know, son," Hank responded. He almost sounded like he was crying. He then stood up and walked inside, leaving Bobby and Ladybird, who were still on the porch. It once again cut to a very dull scene of nothing but black and gray and skin colors. It was a scene that literally made me sick to my stomach. It was Hank hanging from the ceiling, with a note pinned to him. It just stayed focused on him swinging back and forth for 2 minutes or so. It then cut to the ending credits, with the normal outro and theme music. I was actually kind of laughing on the inside at the fact that the show was playing the regular ending credits after all that stuff happened. I'm laughing in real life, bro. Quote, "I was really more confused and creeped out at it. I went on some forums but found nothing about this episode. However, I came across someone on Yahoo Answers who had a similar occurrence as me. They received a similar tape at a thrift shop in John Creek County in North Georgia, a place about 20 miles away from where I got mine. I managed to get on AIM with this person, but I got no answers. I was really curious at this point, so I drove about 40 miles and went right down to Cartoon Network / Turner Broadcasting HQ. Fucking what? What? Is this a Nick Robinson video now? I knew that Fox Broadcasting made the show, but I assumed Cartoon Network had every episode on record as they aired them all. A bold assumption, but we'll go with it. Beforehand, I did some research and figured out who was in charge of broadcasting King of the Hill, so I found a receptionist in the studio and demanded to talk to him. Apparently though, I needed a guest pass of some sort. I was completely pissed off at this point, so I drove back home and put on my old sheriff's uniform. I was a sheriff for John Creek County about 3 years ago. I went back, and although it was unlawful, I used my badge to talk to him. This is so fucking great. This guy walks in the Cartoon Network headquarters with a couple of King of the Hill VHS tapes and is like, "What the fuck is this? I know that you know, bitch." And since that doesn't work, he breaks the law to get in now. This went from a casual guy watching a King of the Hill Lost episode and honestly being mostly chill about it, to this in the span of like a couple sentences. Quote, "When I got into his office, he was sitting at his desk talking on his phone. I walked up to him, threw the tapes on his desk, and demanded answers. He dropped the phone immediately and grabbed the tapes. I followed him to another room, an office on the other side of the building. There was a small safe in this office. He opened it up and put the tapes in and locked it. He then told me to leave. I did not want to act like a sheriff anymore because I did not want to get in trouble with the law, so I left. I got home and flipped on the TV. Adult Swim was on. I was relieved to see a real episode of King of the Hill. To this day, there are only 2 copies of this episode on 4 tapes that I can find anything about on the internet. One of them I assume is still locked up in Cartoon Network studios. You may possibly come across more of them at thrift shops throughout the southeast." Unquote. The end. So that was, that fucking sucked. Wow, that was really anticlimactic. All that fuss. You know, you broke the law to do this, to find out the answers, just to have the guy pick up the tapes and throw them in the fucking safe. and then you left like a loser. I mean, at the very least, if you're gonna go through all this effort, you might as well hold on to the tapes, make sure that he can't just hide them away from you. They're basically your leverage if it's really something that crazy or whatever. But wow, it seems like somebody wasn't giving 110% here though, for sure. In all seriousness though, this is one of my favorite Lost Episode creepypastas for everything I've just laid out before you. It's weirdly subtle in the beginning and then goes completely over the top by the end. The only real complaint I have is I wish it would have gone on further. I wish it would have gone even crazier. We should have had some kind of crazy backstory associated with the tapes, but alas, it ended too soon. I also remember first hearing about this story from a creepypasta YouTuber I hear almost no one talk about, known only as Dave the Useless. Well, I think his narration is, well, to put it nicely, you can tell that he only does one takes and calls it a day for this stuff. But he is an interesting channel because he exclusively only reads Lost Episode creepypastas, and has been doing that sometimes daily for 8 fucking years at least. That's not only nuts that there are that many Lost Episode creepypastas out there, but there is someone that dedicated enough to read all of that shit. It's gotta take some sort of psychological toll on you at some point, I'd imagine. But anyway, that's enough Lost Episodes and bonus entries for now. Let's jump into something a bit different. Burgrr Entries. Written by Jonathan Wojcik, this is one of the stranger creepypastas that I've ever read. I had never even heard of it up until this iceberg, and it centers around our narrator who has noticed a bunch of doors and windows have begun showing up everywhere, and they seem to open up into these little restaurants that sell these putrid, disgusting meat products that our narrator has a hard time understanding exactly what they consist of, although they are described in detail a myriad of times visually. He does, however, know anyone who eats it turns into zombie-like people, brainwashed, consuming the terrible flesh, until they eventually turn into these ugly egghead people that seem to turn invisible to everyone else around them. This story is told through several entries from a rather cynical author who is curiously one of the only people who has been able to notice this strange phenomenon, and begins looking into it to find out what the hell is going on. Could it be demons? Aliens? Something that's always been there? The story itself reads a lot like a bizarre Twilight Zone episode, with a lot more gore, of course. The author manages to paint quite the grisly and queasy image through his descriptions of the fleshy, strange, pulsating food and beasts that surround them. It's not the scariest thing in the world to me, but it is very interesting, and disturbing, and overall one of the more creative creepypastas that I genuinely never knew what was going to happen next in. It would make a sick OVA. Psychosis. Written by Matt Demirsky, Psychosis is often considered one of the greatest creepypastas ever written, a true masterpiece. The story follows John, a young man who seems to be suffering from a severe case of paranoia, or maybe he's not paranoid, but aware of something truly terrifying he's preventing from getting to him. He barricades himself inside his basement apartment. He's convinced that some kind of alien presence has taken over the world, but he's not quite sure. And this pasta is presented through his journal entries, trying to rationalize everything, but always finding something that's just off enough about every interaction he has with anyone he communicates with online. After some time, people seem to be getting worried about him and would like him to leave his apartment fortress. Are these pleas from his loved ones genuine, trying to get him to stop being a crazy bastard? Or is it the things trying to get him to come out of his home, using his loved ones as a means of doing so? The pasta is written in such a way that you will more than likely be wondering if something really is going on, or if he is in fact actually just crazy, and nothing is actually going on. It's a simple yet perfect pasta that executes its premise and ending in a truly amazing way. I won't be going against the grain here. If you haven't read this pasta yet, please be sure to do so. It is quite simply perfection, and that ending is sure to stick with you for quite a while after. Definitely in my top 10 favorite creepypastas of all time. You know, by the end of this iceberg, I might actually need to do a top 10 best and worst. And speaking of worst, Nina the Killer. Yet another bonus entry, and if you've been paying attention based on that title, you might know what this one's gonna be about. Now, what's interesting about this pasta is the original story of this is, in a similar fashion to Jane the Killer, a bit hard to track down. Though not because there are several authors. No, because the original author of the story, who goes by Elogothic Twevel on DeviantArt, long ago deleted the original story because it kind of blew up, for all the wrong reasons. See, the basic plot of the original story was about Nina the Killer, or Nina Hopkins, who is a huge Jeff the Killer fangirl, and she's quirky and weird and crazy and stuff. Quote, Nina was not the type of girl that is very cheerful. She was not the type of girl that would open the window and let the light into her room and do something productive. No, she just enjoyed sitting down to watch animes or listen to music like rock, J-pop or K-pop, playing video games or just play guitar. She liked to be herself and loved her family and friends. But this time, she did not want to do any of the things that is considered normal. This time, she wanted to read Jeff the Killer, creepypasta for the 1000th time. She adored him. It was her favorite. She felt a strange attraction to him. She had an admiration for him more than anything. Every time she read it, she felt a strange desire, but she didn't know why she enjoyed this strange desire, unquote. So the girl's really thirsty for Jeff the Killer. Quote, when she started to read it, the door suddenly opened. She quickly saw her little brother Chris and his beautiful green eyes. Nina thinks Chris is her prince. She loved calling her little brother Prince because when she was just little, her mother would always tell her fairy tales when it's bedtime. She liked this type of stories, and she thinks the princes in the fairy tales looks like her little brother Chris. Chris has dark black hair, fair skin, and light green eyes, like his late father. However, Nina has light brown hair, fair skin, and light blue eyes, like her mother. Sis, it's time to eat, said the child with an innocent smile. I'm going, my prince. She pinched the cheeks of her little brother, unquote. No comment upon any of that. But you see, beyond this opening, Nina and her brother, or Prince, are being bullied at school and stuff. But Nina is like totally psycho because she read Jeff the Killer, and so she beats down the cartoonishly evil bullies just like someone else I know. This kind of freaked her brother out though, because if he hadn't told her to stop, it seems that she was going to kill one of the bullies right then and there. She then went to go wash her hands of the blood. Quote, after that, Nina went to go wash her hands. She knew she must avoid telling somebody or even mentioning what happened. Her little brother Chris thought it was just self-defense, but she knew something else was going on there. She knew that something stronger and horrible is starting to form inside her. That feeling of being powerful and strong. The need to hurt someone. The day passed quickly, and when the siblings returned, they sat down to eat with their mother. Well, how is school? Asked his mother with a sweet smile. Chris stayed quiet and didn't answer the question. Great, Nina commented with a psychotic smile. Nina went upstairs after eating and opened her closet, revealing her collection of Jeff the Killer, period. She had several Jeff posters, Jeff clothing, some Jeff notebooks, Jeff dolls, and Jeff stuffed animals. She took a doll from her closet and put it in her bed. She looked at the doll. She couldn't tell if the doll's sinister smile intimidated or amused her. Then she whispered, Jeff, you made me do this, unquote. Nina also gets a note in her locker the next day, which reads, quote, I know what you did, but don't worry, I will not tell anyone. You are very skillful, but also very dangerous. Nina didn't find a signature or anything to identify who wrote the note, but she had the nose that someone saw her but decided not to reveal his name, unquote. I wonder who it could be. Well, regardless, later on, those same bullies found her little brother and proceeded to beat the ever-living shit out of him. And when Nina finds him, all beaten and bruised, she calls her mom this time. And then he's taken to the hospital shortly after, and it turns out that he was beaten so badly that he's eternally bleeding, so the whole thing is just not good. That being said, even though he was beaten to an inch of his life and was eternally bleeding, you know how these creepypasta doctors go. They're either extremely efficient or just do not give a shit about their patients at all. And so of course Chris is released from the hospital the very next day. I'm surprised he was able to stay there as long as he did. Quote, "The next day, Chris was released from the hospital, but the doctor told him to rest for 3 weeks. Nina didn't go to school because she wanted to take care of her little brother. She would tell Chris some stories and she would help him by making sure he would take his medications. Nina went to school again, and she received a new note which read, 'I'm sorry about your brother. I hope he recovers. You must never think you're alone. I'm here. I'll be your friend.'" Nina suddenly blushed after reading it. She checked the letter again, but she didn't found a signature. Unquote. Yes, I do truly wonder who could it be. Quote, "Weeks has passed and the arrival of the school's picture day arrived. Nina was ready for the picture day. She wear a short black skirt, black stockings with deep red stripes, a sleeveless t-shirt that has black and blue stripes, and a bloody red ribbon in her long ponytail hair. But she felt that something was missing, so she looked in her closet. She sees her favorite purple hoodie, which reminded her of Jeff the Killer's hoodie, so she put it on. She went downstairs and sees her little brother waiting in the stairs. They both left the house and said goodbye to their mother. The siblings went to school, but this time they went to the bus to avoid meeting the trio again on the road." Unquote. You know, you gotta wonder, not only with the doctors of creepypasta universes, but with the parents, you think they'd look into who the hell beat their little kid up to an inch of his life where he was eternally bleeding? Does anyone care about that? Like, at all? Quote, "When they arrived in the school, they saw the trio. Claudia, Malcolm, and Yoni are walking in the hallway. They seem to be searching for someone, but Nina was aware that the trio are searching for her and her brother Chris. The siblings decided to stay away from the hallway and must avoid being seen by them. The day passed quickly, but unfortunately, the trio found them. Nina felt that she was being followed. When she turned her face to her back, she received a punch in the face and she fell to the ground. Then she saw her brother. He was caught in the arms of Malcolm. Nina tried to get up, but she received another punch in the belly. She fell back to the ground and looked up. She saw Claudia.
"At last, I found you, bitch,"
said Claudia while standing in front of Nina.
"This is my revenge for attacking me last time,"
she said while pulling a gun.
"I don't want to fight you,"
Nina said while trying to stand up. Claudia immediately shoot Nina using her gun, but Nina quickly reacted to it and avoided the bullet.
Haha, sick anime dodge roll, bro.
Nina stood up and ran as fast as she could to an abandoned house nearby. It was locked inside, so she climbed up to the stairs. The trio tried to shoot her with lots of bullets, but they couldn't successfully shoot her. Nina went inside in the bathroom, and she was trapped there. She wanted something to defend her.
"Nina, you gonna stay in there? Did you forget at what I did to your little brother, you idiot?"
Claudia shouted out from the abandoned house. Nina suddenly felt a combination of hatred and anger, and that need to kill someone. Nina looked around the room. She saw an iron rod. A twisted smile formed on her face. She took the iron rod and left the room. She quickly dodged the bullets and hit Yoni through the head, releasing a stream of blood. Some of the blood went on Nina's face, and there, something that changed her, something broke, like a thin thread had broken, that thread that divides sanity from insanity. Malcolm and Claudia took a few steps back. Nina turned to their direction, showing a psychotic smile, making even Chris shiver with fear. Claudia tried to run along with Malcolm, but Nina hit Claudia in the head. She fell down, and Malcolm decided to release Chris from his hands, but Nina did not stop the violence. She attacked Malcolm in the head a lot of times, and and making his head full of crimson blood. Claudia tried to get her gun in the ground, but Nina prevented her. Nina pointed her iron rod at Claudia. Nina, do you feel good? Chris said as he felt afraid from his big sister. Nina turned her face to him with a little more relaxed look, but she didn't stop smiling.
Do I feel good? I feel great. My prince. Let's go home,
Nina said to her little brother, unquote. So yeah, pretty much like Jeff the Killer, she kills her bullies. To be fair, they were just kind of crazy evil people, but I guess Nina is just insane now. Well then, that very night after the murders, quote, it was midnight. The mother of Nina and her brother were sleeping. However, Nina could not sleep, so she got up. She looked in the mirror and smiled in a twisted way. She went downstairs and she was ready to do the craziest thing in her life. Nina walked into the kitchen. She drank a bottle of vodka and put it on the table. Then she started to search for a bottle of bleach in the cabinets, but she didn't found any bleach.
Where's the bleach?
Nina groaned as she looked for it.
Did you look for these?
Nina heard a voice behind her. She turned around and she was surprised to found a guy at the entrance of the kitchen. He was holding a bottle of bleach. The boy had an extremely pale skin. His hair was black and he had a disturbing smile.
Ah, you're Jeff the Killer,
Nina said.
I have been observing you for a while. I think you have become a killer like me.
Jeff said.
Yeah, you're right. So I need that bottle of bleach,
Nina said.
Let me help you,
Jeff said as he opened the bottle and poured the bottle of bleach in Nina's head. Then Nina felt another liquid running through her head. She looked up and saw Jeff had a matchbox in his hands. Nina smiled at him.
What are you waiting for? Do it,
Nina said with a passion. Jeff grinned and he threw the burning match in her face.
Go to sleep,
Jeff said as Nina's face began to catch on fire, unquote. So, much like a certain other story we read, Jeff the Killer finds Nina quite fascinating, and he has been watching her, I guess, for some time. Weird that this version of reality both has the Jeff the Killer creepypasta story, Jeff the Killer clothes, posters, plushies, all of which is like real life, you know? Because there's actually real life Jeff the Killer plushies and the pasta and clothes and stuff. But also in this version of reality, there is actually also a real Jeff the Killer who really exists in this universe and presumably kills people all the time. It's also pretty funny that while Jeff got his pale white face and stuff from bullies lighting him on fire and shit, allowing for at least a small moment where he's not completely invincible, I guess, Nina kind of just does it herself. She has yet to truly lose something as of yet, actually. Well, anyway, to speed things up, she then arrives at a hospital and after a bit of recovery, goes up to a mirror. She sees that she's almost just like Jeff, pale white skin and what have you. Although with the additional detail that her skin is also as soft as a marshmallow now, which I don't even know how. Then later back at the house, she's sitting in her room and then is suddenly killing a girl in her room somehow, and pulls her organs out all over her bed. She then cuts a smile into her face like, ooh, Jeff the Killer sama, and asks her mom if she thinks she's beautiful. And when her mom calls her a monster who killed somebody right fucking there and screams and runs away, she then kills her own mom. And then she gets tranquilized and put into an insane asylum. But then, because she's so smart and clever and like, you know, she just can't lose, guys, she rips up her bed and pulls a spring out, which they totally have in those places, I guess. And then, when she calls for help and someone comes in, she kills the doctor who came in for her. And then she runs out and everybody is super scared of her. And the security doors aren't working because the tablet that they use to close them is covered in blood, and the blood is like messing it up. Now, I'm trying to think of what kind of door only closes with like an iPad. Does that even exist? It probably exists, I guess. But then there's just so much blood everywhere that you can't even get like your fingerprint, you know? Like you're trying to use your fucking thumb, your fingerprint, you know? It's just not working. It's just not. But yeah, pretty smart, Nina the Killer, to think that one through. But anyway, then she goes home and she runs upstairs to her brother's room, who, by the way, if you remember, she kind of really loves her little brother, maybe even to kind of a weird extent, maybe, you know? And he's also kind of the reason that she turned insane, because she wanted to protect them, and their bullies beating him to death, you know? But I digress. Just something to keep in your mind as we go into this scene. Quote, Chris woke up in his room, and he felt he was in danger, and he was scared. Nina slowly opens the door, revealing her shadow. When Chris realized that it's sister, he took his sheets off to see his sister, but when he saw his sister is holding a knife, Chris became scared again, and he snuggled into his pillow.
Chris,
Nina said in a whispery tone. Then Nina asked her little brother a question.
am I beautiful?
Nina asked him. Chris stayed quiet as he held tightly of his pillow.
Oh, come on, Chris. I didn't do anything bad,
Nina said. She hides her hands in her back while crossing her fingers. It's a sign that Nina was lying to her little brother.
You know, I feel much better now. Let's start a new life. Will you come with me?
Nina said as she gets closer to Chris. Her little brother nodded at her.
Oh, good boy. If you want to join me, just go to sleep, my prince.
Nina kicked the front door of the house while carrying her little brother on her back. Chris was dead. His dead body was smiling that looks very innocent, but his eyes was wide open. That makes him look like still alive. But in reality, he's already dead. He was covered in blood and has multiple stabs. Nina took a few steps at the entrance, and she slowly looked at her little brother.
Chris, I'll kill more people and make them all asleep,
Nina said as she put down her little brother in the ground. Then she walked away to the streets. Unquote. So, I guess she kills her little brother because she loved him so much, and well, that's not important, right? I mean, what's important is that she turns, you know, into a killer, and she runs off into the night to find her true love, Jeff, joining him in killing people for fun. The end. Now, to be fair, the original author was using Google Translate to have their story in English, since it wasn't their first language. Originally, this whole story was in Spanish. So, even though the grammar is atrocious in this story, I'm gonna cut them a lot of slack there, because, I mean, they just didn't know better. Obviously, this story is bad. Like, really bad. It's so cliche, full of Jeff the Killer fangirling, and is literally one of the most Mary Sue type characters in the creepypasta scene. Thusly why the original author took it down, because, well, they weren't really proud of it anymore. And hey, that's perfectly understandable. I know I've written cringy shit in my past as an edgy preteen to teenager, so I can't be too harsh there, even if it's literally Jeff the Killer, but worse in every way imaginable. Except, of course, if you're like me, who loves reading cringy Jeff the Killer shit, in which case, this is the prime rib of Jeff the Killer junk. Truly something special. The general creepypasta community didn't like this story either, and it's often used as an example, like actually instructive example of what not to do when writing a creepypasta. That being said, there was sort of a meme culture around this character Nina, and furthermore, those who do enjoy Jeff the Killer stuff, like unironically, ended up really enjoying Nina. And I guess there was something about Jeff the Killer getting a fangirl turn emo serial killer that for some reason really connected with people. So yeah, there would end up being a ton of rewrites of the story, fan art, especially those depicting Nina and Jeff the Killer together, and even having her be a rival to Jane the Killer, etc. I think a lot of people also like the idea of the Joker-like Jeff the Killer having a Harley Quinn-like Nina by his side. Made for some interesting fan fiction and fan art, don't you know? But since then, the original author of Nina the Killer has actually written a new version of her character from back in the day, actually extremely recently, with a redesign and everything. Her new story is that her whole family got murdered in a camping trip by Jeff the Killer, and now Nina is a mercenary out hunting him down, as well as some other creepypasta villains like Jane the Killer and others that we haven't quite gotten to yet. Her story is pretty similar to Jane the Killer now, though I'm mostly getting this info from the Creepypasta Files wiki, since the new story is written in her normal language, Spanish. But from what I've seen, it does seem a lot better. And I think it's always cool to see authors of stuff like this come back to either show off how much they've grown as a writer, or try something new out with an idea that was once made fun of. And while it's fun to poke fun at shitty stories, it's also important to remember a lot of this stuff was written by younger angsty lads and lasses for one reason or another. And while it is, again, fun to poke fun at them, it's not really cool to hang it over their head forever just because they had a bad story go viral back when they didn't even know what the hell they were doing at the time. We have one more entry on this tier, but before we get to it, I would actually like to read a couple of extremely short creepypastas because I'm just now realizing almost all my bonus entries were kind of shitty creepypastas. And while those are fun, I also want to maybe cleanse our palate a little bit, eh? So, without further ado, let's do a quick couple of short but sweet creepypastas. Daddy, I had a bad dream. You blink your eyes and pull up on your elbows. Your clock glows red in the darkness. It's 3:23 a.m. Do you want to climb into bed and tell me about it? No, Daddy. The oddness of the situation wakes you up more fully. You can barely make out your daughter's pale form in the darkness of your room. Why not, sweetie? Because in my dream, when I told you about the dream, the thing wearing Mommy's skin sat up. For a moment, you feel paralyzed. You can't take your eyes off your daughter. Then, the covers behind you begin to shift. The masterpiece. I've been laying down for hours now. It's 5:35 a.m. and there's not much I can do. You know what the worst part about my situation is? I'm in the same room with my parents. They keep looking at me, and I can't help but look back and try not to cry or scream. Their eyes are focused on me, and their mouths are wide open. There's a strong scent of blood, and I'm paralyzed with fear. Here's the thing. The second that I make any hint that I'm not asleep anymore, I'm completely fucked. I will die, and there's nobody around to save me. I've been trying to think of a way out, but the only idea I have is to rush for my bedroom door, run outside the front door and scream for help, hoping any neighbors hear me. It's risky, but if I stay here, I'll surely die. He's waiting for me to wake up and see his masterpiece. You're probably wondering what's going on. I do get ahead of myself sometimes. About 3 hours ago, I heard screaming from the other side of the house. I got up and went to check on the noise, and I realized that I had to use the restroom. Instead of doing the smart thing and investigating, I used the bathroom first. I could have gotten myself killed right then for my stupid actions. But I actually did my business and took a peek outside the bathroom. there was blood on the carpet. I got very worried and ran back to my room and hid under my sheets. Like the pussy I was, I tried to convince myself to go back to sleep. That it was just some really vivid dream or something. I heard my bedroom door open. Like the terrified child I was, I peeked from under my blankets to see what was going on. I could see something dragging my dead parents into the room. Whatever it was, it wasn't human, I can tell you that. It was hairless, with no eyes and no clothing. It walked like a caveman, with its back slouched as it dragged my parents. But this thing was much smarter than any caveman. It was aware of what it was doing. It propped my dad up on the edge of my bed and made him face me. Then, I sat my mother down in the chair and positioned her towards me as well. After it started rubbing its hands on the walls, staining them with blood, and then drew a circle with a pentagram in it. To finish it off, it scribbled a message on the wall that I couldn't read in the darkness. It then positioned itself under my bed, waiting to strike. The scariest thing is now, my eyes have adjusted to the darkness since then, and I can read the message on the wall. I don't want to look at it, because it's terrifying to think about. But I feel the need to see before I'm killed. I peek at the creature's masterpiece. I know you're awake. And with that, it's time for our final entry this tier. And boy, is it ever a doozy. Tales from the Dogscape. So for our final entry this tier, we have what is officially the most bizarre and out there creepypasta I have ever personally read. And I mean that in every good way possible. The Dogscape is what is left of the world of man, and perhaps I ought to read the first log entry to explain the premise better. Quote, Log 1. I awaken. I do not know it at the moment, but this day marks my 4th straight year of existing in the Dogscape. I push myself up from the carpet of writhing, twitching dog flesh beneath me and rise to my feet, stretching in the morning sun. It took me a while to learn to balance on the layer of solid dogs that now blankets each and every inch of solid ground. But nowadays, I can walk and run as easily and as fast as I ever could on soil or concrete, perhaps faster. It was a city once, I think, though which one I can't remember. I only owe my guess to the massive pillars of dogs jutting up into the sky. Perhaps ancient buildings now completely filled and overgrown by canine biomatter. I climbed one once, sinking my fingers and toes deep into the dog wall to gain purchase, and after hours and hours of climbing, was rewarded with an incredible vista, fur and eyes, panting tongues and wagging tails, hugging the contours of the once barren land, and stretching in a single amoebic mass farther than the eye can see. Now, I don't do that though. Now I merely go about my day. I hike to the gardens where the dog plants sprout up in bizarre shapes from the floor of the Dogscape, and reach up to pluck the fetal puppy fruits right off the wagging, energetic branches. I bite into the succulent flesh, the juices dribbling down my chin and dripping down to be reabsorbed by the ground flesh, and revel in the savory taste. I'm thirsty, so I range until I find one of the mother mounds, and there I suckle at the teat patch until I've had my fill of milk. Sometimes I see other humans around me as well adapted to the Dogscape as I am, but I barely acknowledge them, say nothing. What
After all, is there to say? The world is different now. What meaning would our old words have? Free-ranging dogs are becoming rarer and rarer to see now, and those I do see seem as lost, as passive as I am. They too graze on the dog plants, step carefully over the undulating, bleeding dog floor, dimly acknowledge myself and one another. In the distant sky, and on the far horizon, I sometimes see massive forms sail or crawl or undulate. And I wonder if in this new world, normal, singular, ambulatory dogs have become as obsolete as I am. Unquote.
So, if you didn't catch that, the fucking ground is made of dog corpses and like a mass of alive dogs, kind of? And the world is now this ugly, festering, vile planet made up of dog-shaped abominations in all shapes and sizes. To say that this creepypasta is gross and really fucking weird and disturbing would be an understatement of the year. I mean, the guy gets all his drink dog nips from the ground. It's something of a visual. Beyond the setting, we get to know our main narrator, his struggles living in the Dogscape, as well as the general fall of humanity in this Lovecraftian, ungodly world. He and the others must eat the flesh to survive, and others, sometime, the flesh can tempt men to never leaving its side. It's quite ghastly. In fact, I should warn you that if you wish to read this story in full, there's some pretty not safe for work and not safe for life content in there later on. Tales from the Dogscape have me both repulsed and intrigued the whole way through, and it feels like reading the journal entries of an ultra surreal nightmare. It's a wild yet very depressing ride, to say the least. I kind of forgot I was reading a creepypasta at some point, actually. It felt like something more out of the imagination of Clive Barker, or maybe something out of the works of Junji Ito. Actually, it reminds me a lot of Junji Ito's manga. I can confidently say that there's not going to be any creepypasta that's going to be quite as outlandish as this one is, nor as depraved and dehumanizing as this one gets later on. It would take a while to cover the whole thing, so I'm gonna leave it at that for now. But if you're interested in it, definitely go give it a read. It's very interesting if you know what you're going into. And that is it, ladies and gentlemen, for the fourth part of the Creepypasta Iceberg. We are really starting to make some good progress on this iceberg now, and there should only be a few more parts left. Probably 2 more, but we'll see. I do have a tendency to add a lot of stories as we go along, and I have like 20 or 30 more stories I want to add into this somewhere. You know, maybe in the super edit, I may add a few extras in the other parts for it to all be like better paced or something. But hey, at the end of the day, it just means more time spent with you lovely people and talking about creepypastas. What could be better, honestly? That said, thank you all so very much for getting to the end of this video. Happy belated New Year. I hope that you're all having a lovely year thus far within the first week or so, and that you're getting started on some of those long-term goals. I know I certainly am. A lot of them having to do with this channel. At some point I may do an update video or a live stream, we'll see how it goes, but all the same, expect a lot of videos coming out this month and next month in particular. If you want to keep more updated on my videos and my current plans, then I'd highly suggest going and following me on Twitter, link down below. You probably noticed that I have a new avatar and channel banner, which is thanks to this lovely person, Pawi17 on twitter.com. I commissioned her for these to start the year off with a fresh new look. She's a really great artist and has some great commission prizes at that as well, so I'd highly recommend going and checking out her stuff on Twitter. Her talents will definitely be helping out this channel with a few future projects in the near future. I also, of course, want to take this opportunity to thank all of my patrons over on Patreon, including all my night owlets, both of my great night owls,
the steaming Ho-Hot, and the murderous Macabre Kaiju, as well as both of my arch owls, the persona-wielding Philemon and the Chi Vibes Zen Garden Party. If you'd also like to support the channel and myself, then be sure to check out my Patreon down below. I've restructured the benefits a bit for the new year. One of the things I haven't really advertised up to this point is you can actually get access to my Discord server through the first tier and onward. I've also got some new stuff planned for the Patreon, which again, I will be updating you guys on in further details in an update video coming out here soon. But for now, at the very least, you do get access to the Discord, which you would otherwise not have. But at any rate, expect some pretty big stuff and updates coming up here soon. But until then, this has been Dylan the Night Owl, flying off.